So my name is Debra Safer, and I'm a faculty member here in the Department of Psychiatry. And my training has very little to do with climate science. But what happened was that I read Albert Bandura's book, Moral Disengagement. And his last chapter was about climate change. And he talked about a particular type of scripted entertainment, which we're going to hear about in great detail today. It's been tremendously effective globally in bringing about social change on a nationwide scale. He recommended serial dramas as the most promising strategy for significantly shifting people's attitudes and actions towards climate change mitigation and resiliency. And he was very kind and talked to me about this. And I was saying to him, I couldn't figure out why we didn't have a serial drama in the United States addressing climate change. And so Dr. Bandura was kind enough to agree to speak.
I got a call back in 1972, I guess it was, from a man named David Poindexter, who was very critical in the linchpin in what we're going to be talking about. And I was then chairman of the board of the National Television Academy, and he called me because of that, and he wanted to involve the people who were doing television at that time in dealing with, well, how to use the power of storytelling to improve social and health outcomes. That's pretty much what it is. The point is to change people's behavior. And the key to that is Albert Bandura's research and what he's learned since then.
It's interesting to have a 94-year-old introduce the 92-year-old. The other day, I received an email from a high school student who's taking psychology, and he said, Professor Bandura, we have a serious problem and only you can answer it. Professor Bandura, are you still living? So I wrote back that we have email there, but not Facebook. And now I'm, well, thank you, my dear friend. Now, the failure to address the psychosocial aspects of life are really the weakest link in our social policies because they don't address the impediments that people face, and you can provide resources and access and still get no effect. And so one has to identify and modify the impediments to change, and one has to create the motivators for them. They don't come automatically. Now there are three components in effective dramas. And may I have the next slide, please? The first is a theoretical model. It presents the guiding principles. The second is a translational and implementational model. It converts theory into innovative practice. We had a very effective theory, we had a very effective translational model, but we didn't have either the competence or the resources to present this program worldwide. And the video, and this is where Poindexter and Sonny Fox and Bill Ryerson then provided the third element in population media center. Now the video clip illustrates the production drama as how do you produce these, and this was in Tanzania.
One of the main reasons for PCI's success is its understanding of the needs of each area that it works in, with the production teams carrying out detailed research and having direct contact with the people and communities concerned. The methods used by PCI are influenced by the social learning theory developed at Stanford University by Professor Albert Bandura. It's in sessions like this that the real-life research that they've gathered is very carefully mixed into the imaginary world.
Make that crucial decision on whether she should get pregnant or not. Then we also have Mabuche and his drugs problems, and we want to be able to deal with that problem of drugs, okay? We have HIV, AIDS, we have a couple of people that are dying and so forth.
This then is how the stories begin and how they're developed. The production team bringing a diverse and impressive range of talents and experiences.
Now, these dramatic productions are not fanciful stories. The plot lines portray people's everyday lives and the impediments they face, and they help people to see a better life, and they provide the strategies, the incentives to take the steps to realize their hopes. And hundreds of episodes over several years allow viewers to form emotional bonds to the models, and viewers are inspired and enabled by them to improve their lives. And there are several, and there are several basic principles that guide the construction of these change programs. The slide, please. The first is contrast modeling. The episodes include positive models exhibiting beneficial lifestyles, negative models exhibiting detrimental ones, and transitional models who change from positive to negative. And viewers are enabled and inspired by seeing people like themselves succeed. The second is the vicarious motivators. Unless people see the model lifestyle is improving their lives, they have very little incentive to change. And the benefits of the favorable practices and the costs of the detrimental ones are vividly portrayed, depicting outcomes, provide incentives for change. And the third one involves intentional and emotional involvement. To change deeply held beliefs, the social practices require very strong emotional bonding to enabling models. And they exemplify the vision of a better life and the realistic paths to it. People form emotional ties to the models who speak to their hopes and aspirations. And in Tanzania, there was a woman who ran into one of the negative models at the market, and they drove him out under the rain of tomatoes and mangoes. So they take these characters seriously. And the fourth one is emotional supports. It's of limited value to motivate people for change if they do not have the resources and the environmental supports to realize those changes. And in this approach, we have a dual path of influence. Next one. In the direct pathway, media influence promote change by informing, enabling, motivating, and guiding viewers to improve their lives. In the socially mediated pathway, media influences are used to link people to social networks and to environmental supports. Now, these dramatizations are aimed at building people's sense of efficacy that they can improve their lives. And this core belief is the foundation of human aspirations, their motivation, their emotional well-being, and their accomplishments. Unless people believe that they can produce desired effects by their actions, they have no incentive to act or to persevere in the face of difficulties. So whatever other factors may serve as guides and motivators, they are rooted in the core belief that one can effect improvements in one's lives. Now, both individual and group efficacy are developed by mastery experiences and by social modeling. Next slide. And this is the creed for how you do it. And these modes of influence are wonderfully illustrated in Lynn Sherry's film series on young voices fighting for a habitable future. The power of social modeling in building self-efficacy is enhanced by perceived similarity to the activist models. And this is illustrated in the first video.
When I was watching the Young Voices for the Planet films, I'd never seen kids in action before, and it was really, really amazing. And I realized that there was nothing different between me and the kids on those screens, and I could be doing what they were doing.
And now, acting on a resilient sense of efficacy, the youngsters then went to Lexington and persuaded the government there to outfit all of their public buildings with the panels.
It is unanimous. The motion carries.
We literally just skipped out of the town hall.
We had helped to get solar panels on all the town buildings. We weren't just helpless little girls.
We have more power than we'd ever imagined in our wildest dreams.
After that, it was like, well, we did that. What can we do now?
So what they did, they generalized their success, and they had their own school equipped with the solar panels.
We realized, wait, we have a new school. We can put solar panels on our new school, reducing CO2 emissions and really doing something about climate change. Our whole school will be helping save the world.
I recently expanded my theory to the area of moral disengagement, in which I demonstrate the pervasiveness of moral engagement in virtually all of our social systems. And I published in the book Moral Disengagement. And that has a huge chapter on moral disengagement in the environmental issues. Now people are informed. If people were informed of the methods of moral disengagement, they would see through them and they would lose their effectiveness. And so we should make it hard for people to remove humanity from practices that degrade the quality of life for future generations. And so the kids felt that maybe the adults are irresponsible, so maybe they should take control for it.
So when we were little and we were first hearing about climate change,
It was on the news, it was in the papers, our parents were talking about it.
I just felt despair. It was worse than concern. It was just sadness. I didn't think there was anything anyone could do.
We got older and we realized that the grown-ups weren't doing anything about it. We kind of lost our faith in adults.
If they care about us, they should care about our future too.
No one was going to protect our future for us, and so we were on our own.
Well, in some, psychology provides very reliable principles for affecting society-wide change. Bill Ryerson really is applying these principles creatively worldwide and bettering people's lives. And Bill will show you what he's been up to and up on the front lines.
I've had the privilege, as I said, of working with Sonny and David Poindexter
And I'd like to make a comment about David. He really pioneered this field. He pioneered the field of Hollywood lobbying. He was, as Norman Lear said to me over dinner, David was the one who got Maude pregnant in the two-part series where Maude had an abortion 6 months before Roe versus Wade. David was involved in the idea of having a vasectomy for Rob Reiner's character, we fondly called Meathead on All in the Family. So at any rate, David passed away last month at 89. And then when David retired in 1998, I started Population Media Center. And just before that, set up the research in Tanzania that Albert Bandura was talking about. That had a treatment, or several treatment areas and a control area. And the control area got music while the rest of the country got the soap opera. And it dealt with HIV prevention and family planning promotion, among other things. And the data was stunning. We got the condom distribution data from the National AIDS Control Program broken down by district. And in the districts that made up the control area, where they got all the other national AIDS awareness programs, but not this soap opera, there was a 16% increase in condom distribution, while in the broadcast areas there was a 153% increase in condom distribution. And since David was retiring, I set up Population Media Center to focus really on sustainability issues, including population, but also deforestation and loss of biodiversity, climate change, and various other issues, all centered on the rights and status of women and girls. And I'm just going to start off briefly making a point that a lot of people at conferences like the Paris Conference on Climate Change don't mention population, but in fact, roughly speaking, and I have to admit this is a rough calculation, at the low per capita carbon output of the average citizen in a developing country, which is much lower than it is in the West, the anticipated 2.5 billion additional people from now to 2050 is the climate equivalent of adding 2 United States to the planet. So it's not insignificant. Bradshaw and Brooke wrote in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, well, don't worry about that, it's a giant tanker and you can't turn it around, so forget about population as an environmental issue. Let's focus on technology. To which Bob Walker of the Population Institute did a publication responding by saying, actually, if we stop using fossil fuels today, that's not going to solve the climate problem. We're too far into it. There is no quick fix. And indeed, Brian O'Neill at University of Colorado Boulder did a very detailed calculation, not like my back of the envelope one, in which he calculated that between 16 and 29% of what is necessary to avoid catastrophic climate change can be achieved by promoting a significant effort in promoting family planning, stopping child marriage, and various related issues. So it's not 100%, but it's also not zero. And it, in many ways, is the least expensive of the interventions. A condom is a whole lot cheaper than a condominium. And those who are not using family planning now have, it's about a little more than, a little less than half of the adult population, have as their reasons, number one, wanting bigger families, and number two, cultural and informational barriers among those who don't want additional children. And in fact, fatalism is underlying a lot of those reasons. And indeed, there's a fascinating paper by a scholar named Etienne van der Waal, in which he looked at the interviews with women in the demographic and health surveys that often went like this. Are you married or in union? Yes. Are you sexually active? Yes. Are you using a modern method of contraception? No. Are you interested in being pregnant now or in the next 2 years? Desperately not. I can't feed the children I have. Are you aware, by the way, thank you for your interview, by the way, are you aware that since you're sexually active and not using any contraceptive, you could become pregnant? Yeah, well, that'd be okay. But I thought you just told me you couldn't feed your children. That's true. So how is it okay if you become pregnant? If God wants me to have another baby, I'm here to serve God. End of story. So the lack of self-efficacy is a key driver of unplanned and unwanted pregnancy. So these cultural and informational barriers are what Population Media Center is working to address. So far, we've worked in 54 countries using this strategy. We've produced over 40 television and radio serial dramas addressing human health, human rights, and environmental issues. And we've reached 500 million people so far in programs that, as you've heard, are designed to entertain and captivate the audience and get them in love with the key transitional characters, some of whom go in the wrong direction and suffer the consequences, and many of whom move in the right direction and realize benefits and show the audience how to overcome the obstacles to change and the benefits of the new behavior, and how to deal with the pushback that comes when somebody tries something non-traditional. So role modeling, obviously, Albert Bandura is the role model for all of us in terms of how to design role models who will be highly effective and what makes a role model more or less influential with the observer. And as he has mentioned, we have positive and negative characters who create the drama and who battle over issues, and then these middle-of-the-road characters who represent segments of the audience and eventually sort out in front of a mass audience who's right and who's wrong and evolve into positive role models. So the back and forth by the transitional characters is one of the things that leads to audiences sitting on the edge of their seat. In the US, we have branched into doing a US program, and Kathy is going to give a talk about that. I'll just say PMC created the program East Los High, and we've worked with Wise Entertainment over 5 seasons of what has become the #1 show on Hulu Latino dealing with teen pregnancy among American Hispanics. In the first month of 5 years, 27,000 people linked from this show to Planned Parenthood's website. And it has become such a hit that we've decided to do a bunch more shows in the US. We had originally focused on developing countries, but we now have several other shows in development, one based in Harlem dealing with the lives of African-American youth. We like to do multi-issue programs because nobody wants to go home at night to watch the recycling soap opera. But if you deal with a bunch of issues simultaneously, to them is like a program about life in the country. So these are the currently active programs we have. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm so crazy honored to be here. I'm like starstruck because of Dr. Bandura. I did a master's degree in public health with a focus on health communication and studied your theoretical constructs. And so I saw George Clooney the other day and wasn't even this starstruck as I am with Dr. Bandura. So if I'm nervous, please excuse me. And I'm honored to be on the stage with you and with Bill. I'm here because of them. So thank you. I'm super honored, and I'm excited to talk to you today about East Los High and Wise Entertainment. We're based out of Los Angeles. We're a production company that focuses on content that is striving to affect social change, to change the narrative, but where women and underserved audiences are at the center of the narrative. We employ a 4-pillar, a holistic approach. All have roots in what Dr. Bandura and Bill talked about, which I'll walk you through using our case example of East Los High. The mission to address the issue of teen pregnancy, I think in 2010, the statistic was that 52% of Latinas were getting pregnant before the age of 20. And so this show set out to address that issue. But over the course of over 60 episodes, we've ballooned to address many other different social issues. But to address these issues effectively, having a strong research component is paramount. Similar to what Bill outlined and what he's doing around the country, we did that for East Los High. In terms of formative research, we're not just understanding the issues, but we're also understanding the cultural zeitgeist. Through traditional literature searches and interviews, but also focus groups, sitting down with students in East LA, elementary school or high school students, hearing from them things that we would never learn from a white paper alone. So being able to go into the communities and understand them and understand the issues and their day-to-day life, these are all nuggets that help inform the tensions, the conflict, the drama, the stories that we weaved into East Los High. But we're not experts in these issues. And so a key component is leveraging partnerships with different organizations, partly because, again, we're not experts, but also Hollywood doesn't fund this kind of research. And so partnering, for example, with the Ford Foundation to help support this kind of work allowed us to go deep into these issues. For East Los High, we had an advisory committee of over 20 different organizations. This is a sampling of organizations at the national and local levels. But first and foremost, these issues need to be portrayed in an entertaining way. The audience for East Los High, if they get a whiff of PSA, after school special, eyes glaze over, we lose them. And so, preachy messages. And so it's really important to us to have entertaining narratives, complex characters, universal storylines. All of us can relate to stories of love and heartbreak, loyalty, family. In the case of East Los High, Jacob was in love with Jesse, but also Jesse's cousin, Maya. And we've all been through that, right? And characters that our audience can relate to. Again, this is really harkening back to Dr. Bandura and role modeling and identifying with these characters. They're more likely to change behavior. We employ a multi-platform strategy, also known as transmedia, in which our world and our characters expand into. It allows us to go deeper into the stories, into the issues, into the characters, because we have to keep up a certain cadence of drama in the show. In the case of East Los, every episode was 23 minutes. And transmedia, having all this ancillary content, allowed us to go a lot deeper into the issues and also share resources to continue the role modeling. This is a sampling of all the different transmedia pieces that East Los High had. And here is a reel of all that I just talked about into practice with East Los High.
Grind me thirsty, grind me thirsty, grind me.
We urge you to speak up and give someone with no voice a voice.
We do what we need to do to survive.
Where were you last night?
How about we meet up later and I'll help you out?
So what do you want? I want to win. I'll dance with Caleb.
Not buying drugs.
But you said you'd do anything.
This wasn't my back, remember?
Sassy Kamaya, will you marry me?
Yes.
Stupid bitch!
It's a safe place for you.
Thank you so much. If you know someone like Ceci, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
Yeah, but who wants to talk about their father molesting them?
You're not to blame.
But instead, you didn't say anything and you just started to cut. It's healing.
I've never used a dental dam before.
Are we together or what? I'm just becoming comfortable with who I am.
The only thing positive about you is your HIV status.
And proud. This is the High V blog. Mitch, are you recording this? I'm Vanessa, giving you the 411 on HIV for free. When I first found out, I couldn't even say what it was. I was in denial. Where did you learn so much about HIV? You can check out sexetc.org. I got a few good pointers myself, if you know what I'm saying.
Welcome to another edition of Ask Paulie. If you got any questions about sex or dating, you could click the link below. What is LGBT sex like?
Are there any boundaries to sex talk in bed?
You can get an STI through oral sex or vaginal sex.
A woman's body belongs to her, and it should be her right and only hers to decide what to do with it.
You shouldn't even be in this competition, let alone this country.
I've lived in this country my whole life. I'm just as American as you are.
They came.
Who's they?
Immigration. They took everyone.
That's why we gotta keep speaking up and coming together. I mean, so we can be a part of this country and vote and finally be proud to call this place our home.
Welcome to Gabe Cam. Taji's gonna teach us a move right now.
And as you saw through that reel, the transmedia components are just as important as the main show to us. They're not considered as the DVD specials that are an afterthought. They are conceived at the same time as the main show. And we take just as much care and attention to it because, they're bite-sized pieces that can go viral and provide the show with multiple touch points and again, allow us to go deeper in a lot of these issues. But also, we're not just using the show to raise awareness about these issues, we're also using transmedia to help close the loop so that they can take action. We also do a lot of summative research. Our impact evaluation for season 1 was the most robust. These results can be seen in an article published in the American Journal of Public Health. We were so grateful to work with Dr. Arvind Singhal and Helen Wang, who are lead entertainment education researchers. For season 1, we had a multi-pronged approach, one of which included a lab experiment. We had 5 different groups. One was a control that did not receive any intervention. One received non-dramatic text, so it was health information in the form of a news article. Another group received the script. Another group received watched a dramatic feature, so they kind of took season 1 and whittled it down to about a feature-length video. And then the 5th group got to watch that video, but also was exposed to all of our transmedia pieces. For season 1, it was like over 12 hours worth. And I'm going to share the results of that shortly. The evaluation also included interviews, surveys, and also looking at social media analysis and web tracking. These are some of the key findings. Over 27,000 people used the Planned Parenthood widget that was embedded on East Los High's homepage during the first month the show was airing. Also, traffic to the website Stay Teen, which was also embedded on the websites, traffic doubled on the day it premiered. 48% visited the eastlosshigh.com webpage, where we shared a lot of different resources, and 81% shared and recommended the resources that they learned about. And the finding that came out of that lab experiment was that transmedia, that multi-platform storytelling strategy, was the most effective format of narrative presentation significantly over and above all other formats when it came to condom use. And so, we really see this as I'm hoping that you see Islas High as an example of how this methodology can address an issue like climate change, and I'm excited to talk about that, and thank you very much.
If it's okay, I'll give you just a quick run through of why I said yes to standing up on this stage, with what could be an otherwise quite intimidating cast of characters. So for all my life, I have been interested in the intersection of the environment and business and society, and how we improve that. I started off as a journalist. I wrote for a magazine called The Economist, covered a whole bunch of things, but really focused in on sort of the intersection between business and environment, government and the environment. From there, I went back up my master's at a small Stanford wannabe called Harvard, and then we even copied your color, I don't know. And from there, bounced around a little bit, wound up in the Clinton administration, was in the Commerce Department, where part of my job was to be, as we said at the time, the reasoned voice of business in environmental debates. And now I am at the Environmental Defense Fund, where I help run all the work we do on ecosystems. So my passion has been really trying to help people understand what's at stake and then get them to do something. And being coming out of a good academic background, I was certain that, of course, if I just explained it, it would all make sense, and we'd be on our way. I don't need to tell all of you that is the least effective way of getting people to do things. So I have been borderline obsessed with the idea of behavioral economics, social decision making, and how we harness those tools to actually create the change that we're after. And clearly, we have a room full of people who really understand how to change behaviors. And I was asked today to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do to help with climate change. But in listening to and I'm happy to do that, but in listening to the conversation, it dawned on me that one of the things that I wanted to actually do is ask you to help me. And what I mean by that is, okay, we know how to change behaviors. So what behaviors do we want to change? Let's put on hold for a minute the actual actions, the things but what behaviors do we want to change, and why is this so hard with climate change? I added up sort of 3-4 major reasons. The first is that the issue has become so incredibly political. And in fact, you can tell what people's political points of view are by what they think about climate change. It's an incredible correlation. And that makes it virtually impossible to get anything done. Now, the work that I do, I only work in red parts of the country. And that's because that's where so much of the habitat is. And so if you're working on ecosystems, you wind up working in these red parts of the country. And I have been in conversations, I'm gonna stylize it a little bit, but it almost goes something like this, don't you think climate change is happening? And the answer is, oh, absolutely not. I will never vote for Hillary Clinton. And what's happened is, it's not because the political or the environmental values are that different. So what that says to me is that there's a true environmental stewardship value that we share as a nation. The problem is it's become disconnected from the political voice. So one of the behaviors is reconnecting those values to the political voice. So another reason why this has been difficult is that we have somewhat obsessed on just one side of the challenge of avoiding the catastrophic impacts of climate change. And that side is looking at the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere and having to get those down. We really need to do that, but that's just one side, because even if we succeed in hitting the atmospheric levels of carbon that the world has agreed to in the Paris Agreements, the recent Paris Agreements, we still will have catastrophic impacts unless we begin working on adaptation and resilience. Just like people need to be resilient, Our societies need to be resilient, and ecosystems themselves need to be resilient. And once you start thinking about what can we do today to start preparing for a future, a changing future, there's all kinds of things that you can do that don't require signing up for a carbon tax or some of these other things that have become quite political. All right, third reason. Avoiding the catastrophic impacts of climate change requires individual action, but unlike some of the goals of the work that we've been seeing today, individual action isn't enough. We have to take action as a society, and we have to do some really difficult things. We've got to move carbon out of our economy, and we have to think differently about nature. I think that is a really critical thing, because solving climate change isn't going to be about one magic, a magic bullet. If we just do this, if we just do that. No, it's going to be, it's really changing our relationship to nature and being willing to make short-term sacrifices and changes, transitions, in order to have long-term benefit, and really being able to help people conceptualize what those long-term benefits are. So I'm going to try to make this concrete by an actual example of something that we've done in coastal Louisiana. Coastal Louisiana is ground zero for sea level rise and the other impacts of climate change. They have it's also a deeply conservative state, about as deep red as you can get, and they are losing land at a tremendous rate. Well, everyone knows that. They can't avoid that. So the state wrote this thing called the master plan, the coastal master plan, and it was a 50-year plan for how they're going to save the coast. It was based on an open, if dirty secret, that no one was ever going to have to move, and that we were going to be able to maintain the delta the Mississippi Delta in its current state. No one believed that. But that was the premise upon which the plan was based. And we talked to a number of the people responsible for writing the plan, and we said, you've got to talk about the fact that people are going to have to move. We're going to have to really make some big changes. And they rightly said, if we sit here in Baton Rouge and start telling people that you're going to have to move and you're going to have to move, but you're okay, you can stay there, it's going to be dead in the water. And they were actually right. So what we did, and of course in that deeply conservative state, you couldn't really have a conversation about climate change. So what we did was we put together this little thing that we called Changing Course. It was a design competition, and we invited the most at-risk communities to come together. We provided them with the best engineers, the best scientists, whatever they wanted, they could have, and say, in 50 years, what do you want this delta to look like? And how would you make the choices to do that? You can go online and check it out, changingcourse.com. And these are everyday people, right? These weren't experts. These are everyday people who actually live in the parishes that are going to be affected. They also worked with the navigation interests. The Port of Louisiana is the world's most important port in terms of moving food and energy. No port in the world moves more food and energy through it than the ports of Louisiana. They brought in the navigation industry. They brought in the civic folks. They brought and really worked it through together. And over a 2-year process, came up with 3 finalist designs. And the amazing thing is, even though they differed in some of the specifics, they all agreed on a number of really important principles. The first one is, hey, we can have a sustainable delta, but it needs to be smaller. We're going to have to retreat. And people are going to have to move. And then they began to ask questions about it. Well, how can we help people move? And they did very creative things like ask people, well, people retire in different places, and they don't leave feeling defeated. How do they? Well, they go and visit a place, and then they say this was really fun, and they get their friend to come, and they back. Why can't we identify where the lands are that are going to be protected in the smaller, more sustainable delta, and begin to offer incentive packages for people to go hang out up there? There was a whole variety of these that people, just everyday people, were thinking up. So we did a big presentation of the plan. The state officials were there. And what they came to us and said afterwards was, that project broke their logjam. And by the way, it also talks about part of the reason for this happening is climate change. Part of it is the impact of the oil and gas industry. All these taboo subjects But they said, look, we're just saying that this is the effect. We're not saying you're bad for that, but we have to acknowledge that's what's going on. So the new master plan has come out. It acknowledges climate change. It takes some really important steps towards the kind of projects and thought processes and conversations that have to happen to create a retreat and a hardening. It's not just about putting in more wetlands. There are levees and dikes that need to be built. But it was really an example of how we're able to engage everyday citizens and have them take some very brave stance, be in some very difficult conversations, but come out with something that people felt really good about. I'd like to know how to replicate that at scale. And I think some of these ideas, I think we sort of, by not exactly throwing darts at a board, but we didn't have the expertise that you guys have. And I'm very excited to think about what we could do with that kind of expertise replicated over many, many places. So I'd like to stop there if that's okay.